right, well, welcome back, everybody. How's everyone doing today?
Good.
Good. So, Tom, you're there in, where are you today? You're not in Alberta today, are you?
Yes, I'm in Alberta today.
Okay, you are in Alberta. So you guys have a campus at Alberta, Keysville, Emporia, or is that?
Yes, Emporia, South Boston. We actually have, like 13 different locations. We got a thing in Fort Pickett, Chase City, South Hill, yeah, and then doing dual enrollment in some different high schools and stuff. But we really got like 6 centers.
That's cool. Well, guys, so I guess we'll go ahead and get into it. So we'll be starting. I put the syllabus up, and I know. Thank you, Tom, for getting copies of the syllabus out. If you don't have a copy yet, then look at it on Blackboard. It's going to be pretty straightforward, really. And I'll kind of let you guys review the syllabus, and please just let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, gripes, grievances, all that good stuff as soon as possible. I'm going to share my screen here and just go through, highlight a couple of things off of the syllabus real quick. Move to my screen sharing here. All right, so here we are. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yes. This is what it looks like in Blackboard, of course, and you can find that over here at the Syllabus and Policies tab on your Blackboard site. My information is listed up there. I just now got a Southside email address, so be sure to send any correspondence there. I'll be trying to check that as regularly as possible. And kind of my policy is to try to get back to you guys within about 24 hours. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but in general, I'll try to get back to you within 24 hours of any emails. Thank you all for posting to the discussion board, and I tried to put some of your interests in there. So the syllabus is kind of run-of-the-mill. Course description is given to us by the BCCS. This is kind of the things that we have to cover. Whenever we get a lab schedule, we'll put that up as well. As I scroll down here, I wanted to show you guys the grading criteria, and basically everything here boils down to 20% of your grade. So everything's weighted equally. 1/5 of your grade comes from each of these areas. So the first assessment, of course, is our weekly quizzes. We do a quiz pretty much every week, and the way that will work is probably on Monday, we'll kind of use that as sort of a review day to discuss any questions that people had from the chapter of that week. And then the quiz will be due the following week. So this week, you're going to start and read Chapter 1. Chapter 1 quiz will be due next week. We'll have time on Monday to kind of review a few things. Of course, I'm not going to go strictly by the book, but because I think the book is missing some things here and there, so it will be important for you all to take notes during these lectures. These quizzes are going to be open note, so really they're pretty easy, but it's meant to kind of be a guide for the exams. So most of the exam material will come from the quizzes. The next major piece is a crop project. So given that everyone kind of has different crops that they're interested in working with, we're going to basically have everyone do a project to custom tailor their interests in those crop areas. And then you'll research that, and then I'm going to have you guys join as groups for a team project a little later on, where we're going to try to group you guys kind of in similar crop areas, and you will do a little bit of an online presentation. More details on that later, but I just wanted to go ahead and mention to you that you should be thinking about what crops you want to sort of focus on for the semester. The next piece is the lab assignments, and there will be a write-up associated with each lab. And as we develop that lab schedule, we'll kind of give you more details on that. There will be 2 exams, one midterm and one final, and basically it'll also be pretty straightforward. Each exam will be 50 questions worth 1 point each for a total of 100 points for 1/5 of your grade on the exams. And then I already mentioned the team project, but again, you guys will be working together, and that's just part of something that we're working on here at Virginia Highlands. But I think it's important for all colleges to look at, and that's the development of soft skills. And one of those major soft skills is teamwork. Because if you can't work as a team, then, well, it's going to make life hard for you, right? So for the team project, we're going to give you more details by the 5th week of classes. I'll kind of skip through the course policies. You can kind of read through that yourselves. We're not going to really take attendance, but it is important for you all to be there. And if we assign things, you still have to do the work if you miss today. Down below, here's the course schedule, and you can kind of see here that basically we're going to be doing mostly 1 chapter a week. And some of the chapters are a little thinner, some of them are a little thicker. We are going to pick up the pace a little bit after the midterm. So up until the midterm, it's basically a chapter a week. I say read the chapter, but really it's more, scanning the chapter. I would definitely recommend looking at the PowerPoint presentation. So again, this is a tentative schedule, so we can adjust this, of course, with your needs and our needs as well. I put a little piece in there that on our campus we have a greenhouse, and we are constantly dealing with issues with the greenhouse. It's about a decade old now, so if we have contractor work in the greenhouse, we might have to adjust the schedule a little bit because I'll probably have to be down there. Anyway, schedule assignments, of course, should be completed in a timely fashion. Quizzes will be due every week. Complete those. We'll see how it goes with the first quiz. If everyone gets that in on time, then we won't make any adjustments. But if people are starting to have issues with getting things in on time, then we might adjust that a little bit as well. So read the chapter, look through the PowerPoint, and also be sure to take notes in class, because again, a lot of the things will be a little bit different in our lecture versus what is being given in the book and on the PowerPoint there. So Tom has been great and has already posted a lot of these PowerPoint presentations, and you can find those at this link over here, information and lecture notes. And we'll probably try to clean this up a little bit as we go along. But for now, just click on the textbooks and materials. I'm sorry, information/lecture notes tab. That will bring up the PowerPoints for each chapter. So I've already got the Chapter 1 PowerPoint. So your first assignment is to read Chapter 1. And today I'm going to give a little bit of an overview and highlight some of the differences that I wanted to mention on this PowerPoint. So kind of go through this, but on your own time, but take some notes today about what we talk about in terms of history, trends, issues, and challenges in the world of plant science. All right, so first of all, I wanted to, looking at that, kind of the way they've got it laid out in the chapter, first we wanted to kind of discuss how plant science has developed through time, and a little bit about human evolution as well. So, as they say in the book, modern man, Homo sapiens, appeared much longer than 28,000 years ago, but they say 28,000 years ago, modern man appeared. Without much knowledge, they say, of how plants developed through time.
We just connected to the other classroom. Hi, Megan.
Hey.
Hey, Megan, welcome.
Hey.
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
That's okay.
So I was just telling everyone we're going to be taking some notes here today about some of the stuff that I'm going to highlight some differences between chapter and the PowerPoint that you can find on our Blackboard site, and the differences between today. This book, of course, was last published in 2011, so some of the information is a little bit outdated. So big thing I wanted to highlight about that right now is kind of the evolution of agriculture. And for a long time, anthropologists and scientists really believed that agriculture began 10,000 years ago, and kind of almost overnight. It's kind of how they looked at it, but really they've kind of looked back at that and changed that a little bit, and now they're saying 10 to 14,000 years ago when agriculture developed, and instead of being, just immediately, it kind of occurred over time. So, of course, for 99% of the time that human beings have been on planet Earth, does anybody know what kind of activity we had in terms of the interactions with our environment?
Hunter-gatherer.
Yeah, we were hunters and gatherers. And it's really interesting because our bodies, our biology has evolved to be hunters and gatherers. And since the appearance of agriculture, we have evolved vastly culturally, but really our biology has not really changed that much. We haven't had time to evolve biologically. So we've changed culturally and technologically, but we have not really changed biologically that much. There have been some, slight differences. And a cultural anthropologist, Paul Ehrlich, highlights that what he calls evolutionary hangovers. So when we were hunters and gatherers, we were basically nomads. We were moving along with the development of food plants and animals throughout time. So we've developed to kind of, our biology is a kind of a feast or famine type of feeding. When we have crops, or not crops, sorry, but when we have harvestable plant products and animal products available, we would feast on them. When they were not available, we wouldn't starve to death, or well, some people did for sure, but we would have more of what they call a famine. We would go periods of time with less or very little food, and then periods of time where we had a lot of food. So today, when we have access to food constantly and very conveniently, it leads to things like a lot of health problems like obesity, heart disease, etc., as associated with that development. Because again, we are biologically developed to be hunters and gatherers. So agriculture began to appear around 14,000 years ago, and really around the same time, within that kind of 4,000 to 6,000 year time frame, with different crops in different places all around the world. There was a very interesting plant scientist by the name of Nikolai Vavilov. He was a Russian scientist in the days of the Soviet Union, who basically examined where these crops originated, and also looked at how the diversity of those crops is still maintained around those crop centers. So who can tell me one of those crops that was very early developed, say in North America or Central America?
Sugarcane.
Yeah, sugarcane is a good one in South America. That was a little later on in Central America as well. Very important crop, but definitely sugarcane is extremely important. Thinking of one in particular that is probably one of the largest grown field crops in the United States, as well as in Central America, and now even a lot of South America as well.
Corn?
Yes, corn, Zea maize, also known as maize, of course. Corn was developed in Central America from a plant known as teosinte, is what it's called today anyway. And teosinte is a little tiny ear, very dry, doesn't have a husk. It's incredibly different than the corn that we have today. Difficult to harvest, difficult to consume. So over time, it didn't happen overnight, but over time, humans, which I can kind of consider early plant breeders, selected teosinte with larger ears and began to breed that probably over several thousand years, really. And it's really fascinating that by the time, Western settlers arrived in North America, corn was already being grown by Native Americans as far north as Canada. However, it originated in Central America. So, and they believe Guatemala, modern-day Guatemala, is kind of where that crop originated and where it was developed. So today, that's still where most of the diversity of that crop is found. You can find all kinds of different colors of maize there in that area, as well as different types of maize. Of course, it didn't just happen just then. I mean, that's not the only period of time that corn developed. In fact, the genome of corn has been recently expanded much greater due to developments in plant science, basically. So it's plant science that has really changed a lot of these crops over time. Anybody like to eat sweet corn? Well, sweet corn is a recent advent. It was really in the early 1900s, and super sugary sweet corn was not until the 1950s. So it's we're constantly developing and continuing to cultivate crops today. But the big thing I want to highlight there is that it was not just 10,000 years ago in one place. It was 10 to 14,000 years ago all over the world. There were big developments in the Middle East and in Africa as well, and in the Mediterranean area. So I would encourage you all to look up Vavilov's centers of origin and look at where those crops came from. And really that holds keys to success for the future, especially as we have issues with, say, climate change, for instance, which I'm not going to get political on you all, but whether you believe climate change is human caused or not, you have to recognize that climate change is occurring. I don't know what the weather has been like over there in your all's area, but we had heavy rains here for the past couple of weeks, which is extremely unusual for this time of year. Usually August is hot and dry, and this year it's been cool and moist. Here at Virginia Highlands, we've also been kind of recording, final and first frost dates for our growing season. That really is what determines our growing season in our areas. And generally, we say that about October 10th to 15th is our first frost date when crops are basically eliminated in our area. However, the past 2 years, it's actually been in November. I'm sure you guys probably heard a few years ago about the fires in forest fires in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, Smoky Mountains. That is extremely unusual. And we had a string of 90-degree weather in September and extremely dry weather into November and warm weather that led to those fires. So it's a big challenge today. And those centers of origin and diversity really hold the keys for developing and continuing to cultivate those crops now and in the future. So it's an extremely important thing to look at. Also, trade routes, as I mentioned with Native Americans, they moved corn, Zea maize, from Guatemala through Northern America prior to settlement of civilized societies. They already had sophisticated trade routes way before any Western civilization occurred here in North America. And of course, those trade routes have been developed. Corn is now grown almost on every continent, other than, well, of course, Antarctica. We don't really grow corn there yet, anyway. I'm sure at some point we might be doing some greenhouse production in Antarctica. Anyway, the future is kind of in your hands, you all. It's up to you to grow the future. Agriculture is what began really civilization and shifted from us being nomadic to more of a sedentary kind of civilization, and actually building up towns and cities and continuing to develop trade routes throughout time. And one of the big things that they looked at in development of agriculture is called shattering. Be sure to take a note on shattering. That's a big thing. Does anyone know what shattering is? Well, you guys, if any of you have grown grains, then you've witnessed it. Basically, shattering is a plant trait that when the seeds are ready, they drop off the plant. So someone somewhere in the Middle East basically witnessed a version of a variety of wheat that did not shatter. It did not drop its seeds on its own, which basically allowed humans to be able to harvest wheat and then use it as a food crop and actually store it over time. So there's a lot of human advents that led to continuing to create that. Someone out there somewhere, some human, was able to witness that and actually save the seed from that wheat and replant it. So originally anthropologists looked at that as like happening in kind of one generation and then subsequently selecting and developing that crop to what it is today. However, now that's probably that occurred more like over hundreds or thousands of years. And if you look, there's some infographics out there about how our modern crops have changed over time. It's really fascinating to look. They say that a watermelon, for instance, was about the size of a quarter originally. It was not sweet at all. Over time, with selection, we've turned it into this large fruit, over some cases over 100 pounds, that is sweet, delicious, and nutritious. So we've altered the physiology of the plant just through really selection. And selection, of course, is the kind of first step of plant breeding. The next thing I wanted to look at is sort of the difference in agriculture and, say, horticulture. And anthropologists have a little bit of a different perspective on this. Generally, what we say today is that agriculture is more extensive crops. We look at agriculture being things like field-grown crops, like our commodified, subsidized crops that we have today, such as wheat, soy, and corn, as well as forage crops like alfalfa and other range grasses. Horticulture, on the other hand, is a little bit more intensive production, and it requires more constant care. So we would look at that as more like, say, greenhouse production is a more horticultural endeavor, or even just still field production, but more intensive crops like vegetable crops. So that's kind of what we look at, the difference of agriculture and horticulture today. However, anthropologists have a different perspective on it. They actually look at horticulture as being a period of time prior to the development of agriculture, where humans made kind of incremental influences on their environment. And one of the prime early examples of horticulture or horticultural peoples was when someone somewhere witnessed lightning strike, and then subsequently a fire. And what resulted from fire was typically a change in the ecology. Ecosystem changed from, whatever it was, naturally, in the eastern United States, it would have been forest. Witnessed fire, and then they saw the lush growth that resulted, and of course the animals that came in to feed on that lush growth. So they were still kind of hunters and gatherers, but they were actually intentionally changing their environments. That's how anthropologists look at horticulturists. Also, there's another thing that anthropologists look at, is they call it pastoralists, that really we're looking at the domestication of livestock there. And even today, we still see examples of horticultural and pastoral peoples, like the Maasai tribe in Africa, who basically are still nomadic peoples, but they're traveling with herds of livestock. Fascinating. There's still lots of examples of that around, especially in underdeveloped regions of the world. And personally, I think that there's still a lot to learn from those cultures, how they really learned to adapt to their climate and their environment. Of course, we practice agriculture mainly, but I'm sure many of you probably do some hunting. Maybe some of you do some foraging and gathering too. Can we get a show of hands of hunters out there? Any hunters? Yeah. So you guys are still participating kind of in that system of hunting and gathering in a way. Personally, I like to do a lot of foraging myself for things that you can't buy in the grocery store, like wild mushrooms, for instance. And we'll start to see that change. I mean, we're starting to see some of those being cultivated now. There are a lot of crops out there that have potential to still be developed, wild plants that could be bred. So that really, again, I want to say and kind of impress upon you all that the future is in your hands. Today we eat worldwide from less than 25 plant families, whereas hunter-gatherers in the past was more like 100. So we've changed a little bit, and some of those kind of evolutionary hangovers that I was talking about earlier are kind of surfacing as a result of that. So some other things that kind of coincide with the development of agriculture, the development of metallurgy, being able to actually convert minerals into tools, and being able to plow soil, for instance. It's interesting that notably, one of the biggest changes in carbon in our atmosphere is actually not from the development of the Industrial Revolution, but actually from the plowing of soils that were not originally being used for agriculture. And that really occurs mostly in the Midwest, the breadbasket of the world, where most of the grains in the world are being produced currently. When they started to plow that, they released carbon reserves into the atmosphere. So that was actually a huge influx of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere from soil stores. Something I kind of want to mention, and that the book briefly talks about, sustainability. And this is, I think, going to be coming more into play in crop production in the future. And I think sustainability often has a lot of negative connotations associated with it. But really what I would say, my definition of sustainability is just our ability to continue to produce and sustain human health without compromising the ability of future generations to do that. So the Green Revolution, as we look at it nowadays, I think there's kind of actually several green revolutions. One, the invention of agriculture. But second, the Green Revolution as we know it and what it's called is basically looking at the period following World War II, where we were, I say World War I and World War II, where we were shifting the production and technology of basically warfare technology to agriculture technology. And that's where we get a lot of things like nitrogen fertilizer, for instance, and a lot of mechanics for things like tractors too. So that's all really new advents. We're talking about the 20th century when these things started to appear. And that has, in some ways, compromised our sustainability, looking at things like fossil fuels, for instance. It's a non-renewable product. So as we mine and use fossil fuels, we are reducing our ability to use those in the future because they are a finite resource. So we have to come up with ways to become more sustainable for our crop production in the future if we're going to survive, really. And I think that's up to people like us in the agriculture world. We'll get more into some of the energy accounting and stuff when we get more into ecosystems over the coming weeks. So I'm not really going to cover that very much, although I do want to mention a couple of terms here. One is net primary productivity, NPP. And that is basically looking at ecosystems and how productive they are. Of course, agriculture is a very productive type of ecosystem that we control. However, all net primary productivity is looking at biomass, and it all stems from one source. Can anybody tell me what that source is? It all starts with that big ball of light in the sky, right? Solar energy, of course. And what is that process that we obtain solar energy and move energy from the sun into other forms? It's the P word. Somebody say it for me.
Photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis. Yes, we wouldn't be here without it, right? Plants' ability to take sunlight as well as nutrients from the soil and water and basically turn it into chlorophyll and subsequently energy that is then passed up food chains and through ecosystems. So it's really important to know a little bit about photosynthesis. We'll talk about that later on, but I just wanted to mention that initially. You'll see in that PowerPoint some of the agricultural commodities and natural ecosystems and what those prices and the energy that comes from those, how they change for each product. So today, of course, we have subsidies and we have particular commodities. Those are our main crops. And I think that we're also probably going to see some of that shift throughout time as well.
Oh, were you wanting your slides to be on the screen?
No, I probably should, but I'm going to let you guys kind of look through those
I was
slides.
just making sure because I realized that we weren't.
You guys are probably getting tired of looking at me, huh? Slides. There's some good stuff on there. I'll let you guys go through that PowerPoint on your own, though. I did want to kind of look through a few things here just to highlight some stuff. Another big thing is cultivated varieties, or what we today call cultivars. Those are basically varieties of those crops that we have changed throughout time. Does anybody name an example of a cultivated variety of any crop? How about a tomato? You guys like to grow tomatoes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Any favorite varieties?
I like the red ones.
You said likes the red ones. I like the different heirloom varieties, as I mentioned on my kind of.
I like growing yellow pear tomatoes.
Yellow pears, excellent. That is an example of a cultivated variety. So there are thousands of varieties of tomatoes out there now, which originally developed from one single species, or now actually today we're looking probably multiple species. But the cultivated variety is always listed with single quotation marks. So it would be the genus, the species, and then the cultivar or cultivated variety. And that's where a lot of the diversity occurs today. All right, so there's a lot more slides there, and I kind of scanned through those slides. You don't have to read all of them in depth, but I do want you to pay attention to some of those, especially something I want to look at on the genetic modification and genetically engineered crops. There's a lot of debate over those, and many of my professors at Virginia Tech would say that, well, basically all crops are genetically modified. But there's a big difference in selective plant breeding, traditional plant breeding, and genetic engineering. The proper terminology really to use is genetic engineering versus GMO, or genetically modified organism. Genetic engineering really only can occur in a lab situation. We are intentionally inserting genes from the same or from different crops into the crop that in question that we're trying to change. And a lot of the debate on GMOs, I think, is kind of interesting, because really there aren't that many GMOs on, I mean, you don't see them as much on store shelves, at least in the produce section. Now, you do see them in any processed food products. They're often not labeled, although I think we'll probably see that change as well, as public perception tends to say, hey, we want to see what is genetically engineered. But usually, if you look at most kind of subsidized products that have corn, soy, or wheat in them, most of those are coming from genetically engineered crops. However, genetically modified organisms, I think, is kind of a misnomer, because all of them have been genetically modified by people over time. All right, so I know that's a lot for us to cover in a short amount of time. I'm going to get away from that a little bit just for a second. In this last minute, really, that we have in class, I wanted to just share with you the first lab, and I'm going to try to share my screen again with you here. Get to that. We're going to do a lab that is kind of adapted from the instructor that did it last year. Share my screen here, sorry guys. And so to find the lab, you'll go down to this assignments tab. Can you guys see my screen there?
Yes.
Yep. So click on that assignments tab, and your screen will look a little bit different from mine. But we're going to go down here to this lab 1, where food comes from. And basically, I want you all to go to 2 different food purveyors. And ideally, I would like for you to look at one large commercial grocery store, like a Kroger or Fry's or whatever, and then try to look at one smaller or regional chain, and kind of examine 10 items from each of those. It could either be a processed product or a fresh product, and basically list the product, what it is, a name or title, and a crop variety if possible, the cost in units, and the origin of the product or the main ingredient of the processed product. Also, any comments. I would really recommend that you guys go to like a farmer's market, talk to some farmers about where their products came from, and compare that to the grocery store model. So, for instance, take an apple here. This is a Pink Lady apple. It's an organic apple that I purchased from the Kroger grocery store last night. I like to eat an apple a day, keep the doctor away, right? The thing about this apple, though, that is very interesting is that this is not it's organic, right? And that might lead you to say, hey, that's good. I like organic crops. However, this came from Chile. This was an imported crop, and a lot of our organic crops often are imported. So be sure to examine that in this lab. Well, I know we've kind of jam-packed this class period, so I'm gonna let you guys go. Does anybody have any questions before we sign off? Comments, concerns, gripes, grievances? Everybody good? All right. Well, Tom, do you have anything to add?
No, not that I can think of.
All right. Well, complete that grocery lab by this time next week, and we'll kind of look at that together. Read chapter 1, and we'll have a discussion on that on Monday. Kind of be sure to write down any questions that you have from the chapter, and we'll discuss that on Monday. So I'm going to let you guys go. I know you guys have another class to get to here in just a second. So just keep in contact if you have any questions, comments, or concerns.
Okay.
Thank you all for being present.
All right. Bye.